Hello, welcome to the week of 15 August 2021 on the Security Weekly News. Today, T-Mobile, DeepBlueMagic, Shell Games, China Strikes Back, Colonial Revisited, Fortinet, Captchas, and Cardinals on parade. All this and Jason Wood on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
All right. So what's happening this week? So, yeah, I had a Deutsche Telekom phone way back when, and Deutsche Telekom then forced me to switch to T-Mobile, and T-Mobile later really upset me and got rid of me. And so when I saw this story, I was thinking, I'm really glad I don't have T-Mobile anymore, but then I saw how long ago this was from. T-Mobile is scrambling to deal with a report from Vice that there was a page for offering for sale 100 million data records that supposedly came from a T-Mobile breach. Well, T-Mobile's response so far is that we might have had a breach, but we can't confirm or deny that. But there might have been a breach, but we aren't sure what it was. And if there was a breach, we don't know if anything was actually breached or anything else. Anyway, so far, T-Mobile says they're investigating this. A Twitter account, which you probably heard of, called Undoxed, was announcing details about the sale of this data. And when they were actually approached by Vice, apparently, they denied that they were behind the theft of the data. They're just selling the stolen data. So it's not me, man. I'm just doing business here. I'm just selling these guitars. I don't know where they came from. People bring them in, and yeah, that one still had a bloody hand attached to it. But, that's okay. We're just selling the data. Undoxed did say, though, in this report, they had a lot of information about this. Undoxed did say that there was an opening in the wireless data network at T-Mobile that had allowed access to 2 of the T-Mobile data centers, which subsequently allowed the attackers to dump 100 gigabytes from the customer database. Now, according to this, mysterious Undoxed Twitter account, always a reliable source for all information, but Undoxed claim, and again, they said, we're just trying to sell this data here. We're a marketing firm. We're not doing anything wrong. But they claim that the databases have the name, the date of birth, the social security number, the driver's license info, security PIN numbers, address, phone numbers, blood types, you name it, whatever T-Mobile collected, of about 36 million customers in the United States. And it's still, I was like, well, I had a T-Mobile phone back in like 1995, as far back as the mid-1990s. So not that my data hasn't been stolen like so many times already that it just comes up as redundant when they do the scan. They're like, oh, yeah, we know this guy already. We already have everything there is to know about him. They also claim that the IMSI and the IMEI data, which that's the stuff on the SIM cards for the 36 million customers, is on there. And, I certainly don't have a T-Mobile phone anymore, but basically if you have that data, you can SIM swap, attack, and other kind of things like that. So there is a huge threat to these customers. And I would say with all that data, you could walk into just about any store on the planet and get them to give you a SIM card for all that information. Apparently the other databases there, the remaining information had less personal information there about burner phones and so forth, according to Undoxed. DeepBlueMagic, who did not steal the data by you. DeepBlueMagic is a new ransomware tool. Heimdall provided reports on the behavior of this malware and how it's a bit different from its peers. DeepBlueMagic, I found this a pretty interesting story. But basically what this does is it uses an encryption tool that is a legitimate tool from Jetico. And this has been the behavior of this group in the past that developed this. And basically what they do in this case, they could encrypt the whole drive. So they could just be like regular old ransomware, and it starts running and it encrypts everything and blah, 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 or it encrypts certain files. But this is called drive-based encryption. So what they do is they use a drive encryption tool from Jetico. And so that would be okay. That's fine. It's just going to encrypt the drive rather than encrypting the files. So the whole drive is encrypted. But that's not what they do. They just encrypt the partition information essentially and stop. So it runs very briefly and quits, and it leaves the C drive alone. Now they didn't say if it checked to see if C was the actual boot drive, but once it encrypts that partition information, it stops, which basically means the drive is in a raw state. So the partition goes away, and at least per Windows. Now, the data is still there at that point, and it's not even encrypted. So your files are still kind of laying out there, but you've lost a map to how to put them back together because that linked list that's in the partition information that has all the files is no longer there, which means that you could essentially go in there and maybe try to recover that with data carving. Windows, when it sees that drive, so the physical drive shows up as a hex address, it will offer to format that raw partition at that point, which if you do, then your data is going to be gone. But this is super fast because they don't encrypt the whole drive, and they're basically just encrypting a part of the drive, which will make it look like it got encrypted because when you try to look at the drive, it's gone. So then, maybe that makes you more inclined to pay the ransom. However, if you say go ahead and format to recover this data, then you've got a big problem. Now, if you use forensics tools, mount it in Linux or any of these other kind of approaches, you could data carve it and probably get back your data. But if you've ever seen data carved data, it's pretty messy in general. DeepBlueMagic also goes out and deletes shadow copies off of all the drives, in order to, which is pretty typical of any kind of ransomware today. So basically, this malware abuses a perfectly legitimate approach to disk encryption, interrupts the process to basically delete your data in air quotes, leaving you with a big sticky mess on your drive. And if you've ever, I had like 15 terabytes of data that carved one time. It was just a hot, steaming pile of goo. The technique's fast. It's subtle. The article attributes the malware to the Mamba Group, which has been bringing you malware since at least 2016. So come on down to Rocky Bomba's Malware Emporium, and we put the mal in the ware. We all know what shellcode looks like. We even sometimes know what obfuscated shellcode looks like. I know I've spent a lot of time looking at that kind of stuff, and I'm quite, I don't know. I really like it. It's like some people like to look at butterflies. I like to look at obfuscated shellcode and see how they did it. Modern attackers use all sorts of methods to hide what they're doing, and obfuscating shellcode is a standard approach to framework-type malware. So, sometimes they use base 64, sometimes they just use some kind of little shuffling algorithm, but whatever they do, they chunk this stuff up. So they take an executable, break it into pieces, shuffle all the bits around some way, and that way when it's being downloaded by the local malware from a command and control server, and it may even download from rotating IPs, whatever, it's hard for signature detection and even SIM operators to detect because it just looks like garbage. And they do all kinds of tricks in order to beat that stuff. But basically, it's like smuggling a weapon in by disassembling it into little tiny pieces and then reassembling the weapon once it's beyond the metal detectors, like one of those Mission Impossible stunts where they can't take anything bigger than a guitar pick through the metal detector. So our James Bond has to have a pistol, a silencer, ammo, and a martini shaker broken into little tiny pieces that will be reassembled inside the casino in Monaco using a cigarette lighter. Yeah, like that. Microsoft 365 Defender Threat Intelligence Team has been tracking that phishing campaign, and they have changed their obfuscation method 10 times in the last year. So they're obviously trying to keep this as sort of shifting, which I see being a standard for this kind of stuff in the future, a shifting model so that it's very difficult for people to predict it. They've used plain text, escape key encoding, or not escape, just escape encoding. Why did I say key? Base 64, and at one point they even used Morse code as a means of obfuscating this data. Microsoft said that while the technique is not new, the rapidity with which this campaign obfuscated their obfuscating methods, I added that part, was definitely unique. They don't really do anything new, but they do it a lot to avoid automated scans that are going to detect more and more of this. And there are a lot of easy techniques to chunkify and scramble shellcode as it's being downloaded, so I don't expect this to slow down. China has been cracking down on, well, they crack down on everything. But in the tech sector, the government has really stepped in to try to control what's going on. Even, way back, they built their own internet. They built the Great Firewall. They try to take very heavy control of what's going on, what's produced, how those companies operate. Well, this time they have taken ownership in a subsidiary which controls the domestic, and by domestic I mean Chinese social media and information platforms of ByteDance. If you don't remember, ByteDance, well, they own TikTok. So now this doesn't mean your cat videos are all now being used as Chinese propaganda, although they might be. And it doesn't mean there's any direct effect on TikTok in the short run, although it might. But if you have been trying to drink away the last few years, you may not recall former President Donald Trump's war on TikTok and his executive order banning TikTok and so forth. There were a lot of claims in that era about TikTok being a threat to national security, up to and including, all sorts of different criticisms, bans, etc., that none of which has really worked. But this latest move implies that Beijing is maybe flexing in the direction of ByteDance and possibly Douyin. Douyin is the Chinese approved version of TikTok. So they've kept those two separated. And in China, you can't use TikTok, but you can use Douyin, which is something similar. A spokesperson for TikTok said that they could not comment on the subsidiary acquisition because the subsidiary is relevant only to Chinese market platforms and is not relevant to TikTok. So, there you have it. Maybe, maybe not. Colonial Pipeline, the target of a ransomware attack back in May that was very widely discussed, is now planning to notify customers that DarkSide, the ransomware gang that executed a highly publicized attack and subsequent payment to them of Bitcoin and subsequent recovery of said payment by the FBI, was also able to exfiltrate the documents. So, before they ransomwared them, they exfiltrated a bunch of data, and of course, guess what? This contained personal information of 5,810 individuals. So not on the level of the T-Mobile attack, 100 million, but 5,810 individuals. Of course, this is a much different kind of company than T-Mobile. These records contain social security numbers, military ID numbers, and other government-issued ID information. Colonial said they had no way to know which individuals had their data stolen, but that and here it is again, 100 gigabytes of files, the same as that other one. Isn't that weird? Maybe it's just a nice round number. But they said about 100 gigabytes of files were exfiltrated. Shortly after this attack, DarkSide went offline and swore allegiance to the good and said they would never do another attack, and they've learned their lesson and they're only going to go forth and multiply and do good things in the world. But I suspect they will return, if they haven't already, with a new name shortly. Kind of like Time Lords. Ransomware gangs just tend to regenerate rather than go away permanently. Fortinet released patches for command injection vulnerabilities in their web application firewalls. Rapid7 had found the vulnerability that affects version 6.3.11 and earlier. Now, this particular exploit, which doesn't have a CVE yet, actually, can allow users to run commands as root. So Rapid7 reported this issue back in June and then and disclosed the vulnerability to Fortinet. Fortinet acknowledged the receipt, and then it took them a while. And then in August, Rapid7 sort of followed up with them and said, hey, we kind of let you know about this. And you haven't seemed to do anything. But then shortly right after that, Fortinet disclosed the exploit to the public. So they do have patches for this now. So you should probably, if you're using those devices, you should probably, as usual, go get patching. Captchas are being used to obfuscate malware. Makes sense, I guess. The common, pick all the windows that don't have a Dalek in them is used to validate that users are human, because apparently robots can't. I know I can't do. I hate those things. I can't, they're like, which ones have stop? And I overthink it, and I start arguing with myself. Like, is that a stop sign? It's kind of a stop sign. Well, it's not an actual like red stop sign. It's it's sort of a different. Is it yield sign of stops? I'm not sure. Does a stoplight count? And the next thing I know, I've sat there for half an hour, and I go, you know what? I'll just do something else. But anyway, supposedly these captchas validate that you are human, and sometimes you do have to do them. And at least you can identify random things and random pictures of random things. So, I usually spend a lot of time with this. But the anti-bot approach also has a malevolent version because, when the bots are good bots, like, say, anti-phishing services and anti-malware tools, those go out and use bots to scan sites to see if they're valid, and they look for certain traits and certain features and so forth in the HTML code or whatever kind of code is there to see if it looks like a phishing site. Well, when Captcha pops up and says, "Hey, I want you to prove you're not a robot," and the robots are going, "Sorry, I can't actually prove that I'm not a robot." So not only does that have the effect of preventing them from scanning the site, that's a pretty handy thing. And it also convinces some people that maybe it's a good site because it's got a CAPTCHA on it, right? So it couldn't possibly be a phishing site. So, of course, the phishers jump on this, since anything that will obfuscate that link from prying eyes is going to help with their approach. And, like I said, a lot of people, when they see something like CAPTCHA, think, oh, that means it's legitimate. And, I've literally had somebody call me and say, it's okay to click on stuff if it has a CAPTCHA, right? Because, right? But yeah, but basically this keeps all the malware scans from seeing the traits and so forth. And since the good bots are stopped by the same approach that stops bad bots, well, coming soon, bots that attack and defend good bots, bad bots, all bots. Skynet will not be born from some elaborate ML, but rather from humble little dumb bots that decide to band together and form a union and reach a new level of strength. When we return, Jason Wood joins us with commentary. Stick around.
The complexity of cloud infrastructure means every organization's security challenges are unique. Whether your challenge is threat hunting, policy management, cloud workload protection, or all of the above, Uptycs helps you quickly identify and eliminate observability gaps in your security programs. Uptycs, analytics for the modern attack surface, observability for the modern defender. That's Uptycs, UPTYCS. Check them out at securityweekly.com/Uptycs for a free trial.
At the Sydney Games, he meddled in high-speed tanning and started a line of radium-based tanning products called Baby, I'ma Rub This On You. After several unfortunate lawsuits over the slight radioactivity in the product, he went full green and now makes a line of full-on organic products out of duck urine and bong water called Dude, Where's My Tan? It's none other than Mr. Jason Wood.
Duck urine.
Yeah, it keeps coming up, doesn't it?
It does. Something about ducks.
Aaron started that, not me.
He did.
He did.
Obviously, though, my tanning gold medal has gone away. It doesn't last very long with that. My method. I'll tell you. So, I was looking around and I ran into this article about the kind of the continuing saga of the heist, the theft of $600 million in cryptocurrency tokens from Poly Networks. The company basically is their business model is to facilitate transfers to decentralized finance between one cryptocurrency to another. So, you got your Dogecoin, you can transfer it over to Bitcoin, or Elon's tweeted something interesting, so you transfer your Bitcoin over to Dogecoin because you think you're going to get more pop. I'm not sure. Anyhow, the theft is billed as the largest instance or largest theft of for the decentralized or DeFi world in cryptocurrency, at least so far. I'm sure somebody will eventually break this record because records are made to be broken, right? The Poly Networks was obviously unamused with this. You come into work one day, you find out $600 million has disappeared overnight. Your customers are upset, and they're calling in saying all kinds of nasty things at you and whatnot. And they urge the attacker to return the money or face law enforcement. I'm going to quote a lot of stuff in here because some of this is just kind of amusing to me. So first quote from Poly Networks: law enforcement in any country will regard this as a major economic crime. Yeah, no kidding. And you will be pursued. It is very unwise for you to do any further transactions. The money you stole are from tens of thousands of crypto community members, hence the people. You should talk to us to work out a solution, end quote. Now, in kind of a weird twist, the attacker has actually started to return the money, which is kind of surprising. I don't know if that's because they're actually worried about getting chased down by law enforcement or what, but we'll talk about some of their motives in here. Now, all of this comes from some articles in the Register. I've got the links to them in the show notes. I highly recommend checking out the Twitter chain posted by Mr. Tom Robinson, who had a conversation with the attacker, and he posted that there in a thread of screenshots of the conversation back and forth. Really just kind of interesting to see the attacker's response back to all of this. And you can find, like I said, find that in the Register article, which is, we've got the link to that in the show notes. Regardless, the attacker, according to the attacker, Poly Networks has offered them $500,000 US dollars in a completely legal bounty reward, end quote. Contingent on them, of course, returning all of the money to Poly Networks. Now, the story is a little weird, as you can probably imagine. The attacker says that they're not going to take the bounty. That's fine. I don't need the $500,000. I think they even made a comment about, they're doing pretty well on their own and known in the security industry or have already working in the security industry. Regardless, they're going to return the tokens. Now, Poly Networks has dubbed the attacker as Mr. White Hat. Maybe now we're softening our response of threatening them with hot pursuit by the cops. Regardless, they in their kind of communications and publications, that's what they're calling him now. And they've said Mr. White Hat has returned $260 million in tokens so far and is in the process of getting another $238 million in tokens. Now, there's no mention of anything beyond that. And one of the things that I kind of caught on to, I was like, wait a minute. So 600 million was the initial theft, and we returned 260 and 238 is in the process. That comes out to about 498. That means there's about another $102 million in tokens potentially floating around out here. Or maybe that's just a dip in prices or because it's so volatile. Who knows? Maybe that's what the tokens are worth these days. Or maybe they're just hanging on to it. Not entirely sure. Will any extra funds get returned, or will Mr. White Hat keep $102 million in tokens in lieu of $500,000 and the threat of not being pursued legally? I guess we'll see how that works out. The Twitter chain by Tom Robinson is really kind of fun to read. I'm only going to bring up a few things in here that I kind of just got a grin out of. One was their justification for stealing the tokens in the first place. And basically what they said is they're debugging, it's late night, they're about to give up, and then they realized how they could do this, and now they're faced with a dilemma. Should they, how do they respond? Should they, and this is a quote, ask the project team politely so they can fix it, end quote. So anyone on the team could, and then a quote again, could be the traitor given on $1 billion, given $1 billion. Meaning basically, hey, we found this. I think I could steal $1 billion in tokens out of their environment. And if I send it in, maybe somebody in the company will use my exploit and steal the money, and then that'll be terrible. So and then this is a quote again, the only solution that they can come up with is saving it in a trusted account and keeping themselves anonymous and safe, and thereby also protecting all of these tokens that they just ripped out of this exchange. Later on, though, they did make a comment and said, they probably should have stopped, but they decided, and this is another quote, decided to let the show go on! Exclamation point. And after all, what happens if the victim secretly patched the issue? What would happen then? well, then it would be fixed, I guess. I don't know what the issue there would be, but apparently they were not really happy. They also expressed their frustration with Poly networks because their initial response was encouraging people to hate them before they could reply to whatever communications they were expecting. The horror of harsh words being said to you after you steal $600 million. I can't imagine why they'd be a little bent and start talking about coming after you. Now, Poly Network's tone has changed a bit. They're now saying that the attackers' action is white hat behavior, in their opinion, and hence the offer of $500,000 US to return the funds and then not press charges or anything like that. Plus, they will publicly thank the attacker and give them the appropriate kudos. All told, it's really interesting to read. I really like the Twitter thread that Mr. Robinson posted on his feed. There's like 6 or posts or so where he's taking screen caps. All of it's in caps lock on from the attacker in basic typewriter type of font. They did say that somewhere in this thread on Twitter that they did all of this to raise awareness with the issues of security at Poly Networks and for the lulz. I'm still wondering about the $102 million. No one's talked about how that's going. Maybe he's negotiating for a better bounty. Maybe they just want 1% of the entire thing. That would be a measly $6 million or something like that. One additional note I would add to this is if you are involved in any business dealing with cryptocurrencies, you really, really need to be prepared to withstand some serious attacks, whether it is by somebody like Mr. White Hat here or nations like North Korea, which have expressed interest in cryptocurrency and funding their world. You're going to be a lot of folks are going to come after you. You're housing stuff that's extremely valuable that can grow in value quickly. I mean, it's all kinds of crazy, wild west here. I know personally I've seen instances where some exchanges are being attacked, and you're looking at the size of the organization and the threat actor that's going after them, and you're like, ooh, this is a rough situation for somebody. So make sure you're getting your ducks in a row there and spending a lot of time on your security. And in the future, we'll just see what's going to happen here. It might cost somebody $102 million in tokens. Who knows? We'll see how things develop over the next week.
And when you put 10 million, pounds worth of gold, doubloons in a train and start, driving it around London, somebody's eventually going to try to rob the train. So, yeah, I agree with you. But hey, they're just doing good for everybody. It was like
it was purely
it's like Batman, right? It's like Batman's doing good.
And the lulz.
Yeah, and the lulz. I mean, that's what Batman was always in it for anyway, right? Yeah.
I mean, look at the cool toys he's got.
Oh, that's true. I mean, it's like who could turn down being Batman? I mean, that's why I'm surprised there's not a Batman. I mean, Elon could become Batman literally, but
he's got the money.
He's got the money. I'm telling you, he's got the personality for it. He could get in there. He could get on top of some buildings and brood, and yeah, I mean, like I'm telling you. Anyway, thank you, Jason. And finally, in the irony division, Cardinal Raymond Burke of the Catholic Church. Very famous person in Wisconsin, and he has repeatedly over the years made all sorts of outrageous claims, and particularly during the pandemic, he has made lots and lots and lots of claims. One of his most famous recent claims was that governments were trying to microchip everyone using the vaccination process as an excuse. So, instead of a vaccine, you're getting, a little Bill Gates thing injected into you. Cardinal Burke, very famous right-wing cardinal from Wisconsin, who's often the center of bizarre anti-science rhetoric. Could be, who knows, maybe he's Q. But anyway, apparently he was placed on a ventilator today as he contracted COVID-19. Please stop listening to these idiots. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for joining us today on Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. I'll be back on Friday with a wrap-up show. See you then.